I'm Samantha Robbins, and today I will be talking about compulsive sexual behavior and why there needs to be more scientific recognition and a formal diagnosis. So to start off, what is compulsive sexual behavior? So there are many definitions and conceptions that differ across researchers. So these are just a few definitions. It can differ between whether or not you want it to be non-paraphilic or paraphilic. So essentially what that means, paraphilic would be like more of the essentially kinkier like forms of sexual behavior. So like voyeurism, exhibitionism, sexual harassment, and sexual offending. So kind of like the like deeper and more gruesome sexual behaviors. And then the current status of compulsive sexual behavior in the International Classification of Diseases, they actually classified it as a impulse control disorder. So it's a start, but it's not perfect. So we're getting there, but there isn't actually a formal diagnosis. So some behaviors of compulsive sexual behavior are masturbation, excessive masturbation. Affairs are very common because a good part of the population of people with CSB are actually involved in relationships or married, which is very sad, but it happens. Pornography use, cyber sex, so like live streaming or like chat sites. Their mood can reflect those behaviors sometimes, so they may be more antisocial, more anxiety, more anxious, more depressed. And then some co-occurring disorders or co-occurring other like addictions, so like substance addictions, like nicotine is like the number one that I've seen, but there are like depression, like major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, those type of things. So why is this important? Why am I bringing this to the surface? Why do I want this to be diagnosable? So even though only 3 to 6% of the population in the United States it's prevalent in, there are many studies that have shown that child sexual abuse and that childhood traumas are a very big founder or cofactor, or a precursor for compulsive sexual behavior. So that's definitely something that needs to be talked about a little more. For example, Sam, it was a case study, and he actually went to somebody for compulsive sexual behavior, and he was separated by his mom when he was 7 years old, and he used masturbation and compulsive sexual behaviors as a coping mechanism when that happened. So as he got older, it just got worse. Physical health, though, a lot of people, if they engage in the physical part of it, so sleeping around, they have a higher risk of getting STDs, STIs, AIDS, HIV, that type of thing. Psychological well-being, a lot of shame and guilt comes with this disorder, which is also why it's important to talk about it and give it recognition, because there are people who are suffering with this out there. And then their personal life, so their relationships and their family, even if they aren't in a relationship, these are behaviors that are uncontrollable, they're impulsive, they're urges, so it can become problematic in the way that it would get in the way of their relationships. So behavioral addiction, so this is what I would classify compulsive sexual behavior as. It's a non-substance addiction, so not necessarily a chemical or a drug that is altering the brain and causing the circuit to haywire and whatever. So behavioral addictions, they're actually pretty common. So this is actually a diagnostic criteria for gambling disorder, which is a behavioral addiction according to the DSM-5. So this can be like food, so we've heard of binge eating disorder, video games, shopping, couponing, like things that you could deem as normal, that you are just being so overindulged in that they're becoming addictive. So there's much controversy, because how can something that's technically something that we just do on a day-to-day basis becoming so addictive? But so yeah, there's a lot of controversy in behavioral addictions and if it's even a thing, but in the scientific world, it is real. So when people engage in the behaviors of the addiction, they lead to addictive states, which leads into the neurobiology of the addictions. So we have a reward pathway, which is our mesolimbic dopamine pathway. Dopamine is our number one neurotransmitter that aids in addiction. It's what is firing, it's what gives us that feel good, that great high that we get. The good part of the addiction is what dopamine essentially is. So this pathway is activated by survival stimuli, so this includes sex. So the idea that any stimuli that can change this pathway or any pathway can essentially become an addiction. So that can be behavior. Imaging studies have actually shown very common activation in many different structures in the brain when they were looking at, let's say, there was this one where they looked at a woman having an orgasm and then another person that was in a heroin rush, and those images looked very, very similar. So there is, in the neurobiological level, there are very much similarities when it comes to neuroadaptation and the neuroplasticity. So our brain responds to the stimuli, so that's our reward pathway. And then the more that we give our brain, the more that it's harder to stop, because our brain wants more and more. So that's basically how it happens. And this quote is from Grant, Potenza, Weinstein, and Gorelick from 2006, and it says, behavioral addictions may share many of the same pathways associated with chemical dependence. So behavioral addictions do have many similarities. And then their executive dysfunction, so they have poor judgment and decision making, emotional dysregulation, low self-esteem, low self-worth. So yeah, that's the neurobiology aspect of that. And then going into demographics for compulsive sexual behavior, the prevalence is 3 to 5 times higher in men than it is in women. And higher education has also been seen to be associated with sex addiction, but the generalizability of that specific study is questionable, because it was a sample of like undergrad students who were already interested in the research, so could be very biased. And then whether or not people are in a relationship, it doesn't seem to affect them any differently, it just seems to be equal. So that's very interesting. And then there were higher rates of psychiatric disorders, so like the anxiety, ADHD, the substance disorders, excuse me. And as I said earlier, it's been linked to sexual abuse in childhood. So for this specific study, they had 72 participants, and they were self-identified sexually addicted individuals. So obviously, there's no formal diagnosis. So these are people who genuinely see themselves as sex addicts. And these are just some demographics on like who they are. So just like their age, their sex, their gender, or their age, their sex, their relationship status, and their education. And as you can see, it varies across. So it's not, there's no like prevalence as to who it affects. So that's interesting. And then as for comorbidities, it showed that, so they were looking at the percent of the sample with a diagnosis, and then how, or when, and whether or not that diagnosis was before or after they saw themselves as a sex addict. And so a lot of the times they did get diagnosed before, but some didn't. So that's where the co-occurring part comes in and why it gets a little confusing. So yeah. And then for the DSM-5, so there have been a few researchers that have proposed criteria for the DSM-5 for like hypersexual disorder, compulsive sexual behavior. It can be interchangeably called different things, but specifically, this was the criteria that was proposed for hypersexual disorder in DSM-5, and so this study by Reed et al. Actually used this proposed criteria in their study to see its reliability and see if it was actually valid in using for the DSM-5. And they did end up finding that it would be reliable and that the criteria is appropriate to use in the DSM-5. Unfortunately, the DSM-5 has yet to include it, and there's a lot of reasons why. There's very fine lines in between why and how it happens, but a lot of it is that because it could be from a different disorder, so like it could be depression, it could be manifesting in that way, or bipolar disorder, or just different psychiatric conditions that it's manifesting in that way. Pathology. I can't say this word, I'm sorry, but just overdiagnosing, I guess, and kind of turning everything into a diagnosis. So that's also a really big problem that we have been having recently, especially in the scientific world. And then insufficient research, that's kind of self-explanatory. We just need so much more evidence and so much more criteria and understanding of the subject in order to actually form a diagnosis. And then non-normative behaviors. So that's like the idea that why would a normal behavior be diagnosed as like excessive or compulsive? So then what would a diagnosis look like if, like, for me, if I were to think of it in like a more simple way, if I'm just being like very straightforward with it? So I was going through a bunch of different studies, and Kafka in 2010 seemed to have the best like criteria for me personally that I think for non-paraphilic sexual behaviors. So in 6 months there has to be current sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors. So those have to be co-occurring with 3 out of these 5 criteria. So they have to obviously there has to be more involved, but like starting off, I think this would be a great way to kind of start off and kick off that diagnosis. So then after a diagnosis, essentially, if we are able to do this, we need a treatment. So we need to figure out a way to help these people, get them some clarity, make sure they're getting the support they need. So there are a few options. Meditation is a good one. 12-step therapy is also a great one. Group therapy, so like Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex and Loving Kindness Anonymous, things like that. And then there have been studies on potential drugs. Naltrexone is a big one. There's actually a case study of a 24-year-old guy who tried everything in his power to overcome his urges by doing therapy and all the things. And he ended up getting put on naltrexone, and it actually worked for him. So naltrexone is FDA approved. It's been it's been used in alcoholism for alcoholics, and it's been seen to work pretty well. So it might be an option, but there has to be more studies. So there wasn't a whole lot that I found on it, but so for the meditation awareness training, recent findings have shown that mindfulness training has actually been working really well for behavioral addictions. It's like the best option. And it has been used in like gambling and video games and other behavioral disorders, but it's never been used in sex addiction. So this was the first study to actually implement that into a case study. So his name's Adam. He's divorced. He's in his early 30s. He went through the 3 stages. So there's the early, mid, and the final stage of the training. So the early stage, he sets goals for himself. So an example would be like he has to spend or decrease his spending by 50% on like escorts or other sexual like products. And so that type of thing. And then in the middle stages, they actually did exposure therapy. They had him write in a journal. They had him do a bunch of breathing exercises. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And then in the final stage, they discussed his concerns and like his final goals and what he was expecting. And they actually saw that his depression had almost completely diminished. His sexual urges were almost gone, and then his spending actually decreased down to 73% from what it was. So he exceeded his goal, one of his goals, by 23%, which was really cool. And then the 12-step therapeutic approach is also a great option. So it's actually been used in many anonymous groups, so like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, those type of groups. And so Efrati and Gola wanted to see if the step number in Sexaholics Anonymous was correlated with like helplessness, mental health, their sexual suppression, and other variables. So they wanted to see if there was any correlation between any of that. So they actually were able to find that the step number decreased their helplessness and increased their mental health. So they were less depressed, less anxiety, their helplessness went down. And then they also saw that their sexual suppression and their avoidant help-seeking behaviors went down as well. So the longer and more dedication they had with the program, the more progress and increase in happiness they saw. So with this, diagnosis is important. So now that we know that this is a thing, this is something that is a problem, it exists, we can now, this is the first step. Recognizing, talking about it, realizing the population and realizing there's people out there that need help is the very first step. So thank you.